today. We've been on various calls and she's been coming in and out of those. So Garfield, have we got you on the call? I think we have, haven't we? I'm hoping. Just look at our attendee list. I thought, sorry, Christy or Jess, are you able to see Garfield on the list?
Yeah, I can see his initials, and it says Garfield.
Oh yeah.
Garfield, it looks like you're there and you're not muted. So, oh no, are we going to blame it on the winds of the storm?
Sorry. No, I've got no wind here.
No, okay. Well, we can't blame it on the wind, Frank. Then.
Yeah. Good evening,
Okay.
everybody. I was just kicked off for some reason, so anyway, I'm back on.
Oh, perfect, Garfield. There you are.
Yeah.
Councillor Shaw's just called Garfield. She's had to come out and she's trying to get back in again. So I'll wait to see if I can get another message from her. But she was very, very keen that we made a start if we could today. Just so that, because we've only we're hoping really, where the way that agenda looks at the moment, to keep this to an hour, because it's actually part 2 of the inaugural meeting that we had last time, and we recognise everyone's evenings are very precious. So Garfield, do you want to, as vice chair, what's your call here? Do you want to make a start?
Oh yes, I think we should do. I think people will be aware of where we got to last time, and I think the agenda simply continues from there. So I think we should make a start. Yes.
Okay, so Jess, if you're on the call, do you want to just put the agenda in the chat so that we've got some easy access to that?
Of course, I'll do that now.
Thank you. And just for those of you who were on the meeting, or maybe new to this one, I don't know whether it's worth Garfield, Christy, Jess, and myself just quickly introducing ourselves, because Anne, I don't think, were you on the previous meeting? There's a couple maybe people haven't met before, so it might be worthwhile, Garfield, if just the 4 of us introduce ourselves.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I'll start then. So my name's Garfield Southall. I was the chair of the STTF, the Sustainable Transport Task Force, which has now been merged with the ATF to form this particular group. I recently retired as Dean of Science and Engineering at the University of Chester, and I'm still a professor there. And I'm now vice chair of this committee. So I'm really looking forward to working with everybody.
Thanks, Garfield. Christy, do you want to go next?
Hi, yeah, Christy Littler, Transport Manager at Cheshire West and Chester Council, looking after this group as well, but also sort of transport strategy related business cases, active travel, e-scooters and anything else that falls under our remit, park and ride, etc. That's me.
I think, is somebody sharing their screen? I think
so.
Kathy, is that you sharing your screen? That'd be not that it matters, I'm sure.
No, that's fine. I still can't see the chat. I'm just trying to sort it out. Thanks.
Right, okay. Well, I'll tell you what, if anything goes in there, I'll verbally update you and just double check that, and we could email you separately as well, just check you've got full access there. Okay, so I'm Rose MacArthur. I'm the Director of Transport and Highways at Cheshire West and Chester. And we've got Jess here as well with us.
Hello, so I'm Jess and I am Rose's PA.
much more than that. I will hasten to add. Life shaper. I think I'm going to give it a very different term, but it's great to have you on board, Jess. And Jess will be taking minutes of the meeting today so that we can get a full account of it. Okay.
Can I just add, for admin purposes, Rose, that obviously the meeting is recorded as we normally do. So if anybody doesn't want to be on camera, then to switch off now. And obviously during the meeting, if we need to mute our microphones to reduce background noise, that would be useful as well.
Rose, can I just jump in and say I am back in the meeting?
Yeah, amazing. Have you got yourself back online?
I have, thank you. And for those of you who haven't met, I'm Councillor Karen Shaw, and I'm chairing or going to be supported by Garfield as vice chair. So if you, I'll be quiet and let you continue. Thanks, Rose.
Phew, I think everyone's wiping their brow here, Karen. We were padding before you came back on board there. I was blaming it on the wind, but apparently there's not too much of that out there. So we'll just poor connectivity today. So Garfield and Karen, is it okay if we make a start on the agenda through the items that we said we'd cover?
Yeah, you've done the welcome. So moving straight today as well. For those of you who were on the last call, you'll be aware that we put this second session in just to finish off discussions around the terms of reference, but also the updates on future schemes. Sorry, I will say that again. I've conflated two items there. Updates on submitted schemes and a discussion around future programmes. And so those are the three main things that we're going to be covering today, and hopefully give you an opportunity to ask as many questions as you need to. So who is going to lead on item 2, Rose? Is that yourself or Christy? And we'll go.
I think if we could make that a bit of a double act, Karen, that'd be
Okay.
fantastic. So
Over to you. Thank you.
yeah, brilliant, thank you. So Christy, do step in where there's detail needed, and I'll just go through the kind of the main list if that's okay. So in terms of how to present this back to you, obviously we're in part 2 that we couldn't get covered in part 1. So apologies for those who are sort of new onto this call today, but hopefully we'll be able to make as much of a link back to what we discussed to make it make sense to you. One of the pieces of feedback we got from the first group was that although the list of individual ideas that came forward from the STTF, so the Sustainable Transport Task Force, although quite a number of them were unable to sort of take forward, there were some excellent ideas within there, and there were certainly things that, although they can't come forward in the short term, I think you were very, very keen to understand what had happened to them. And the reason being that a lot of you on this call had spent many hours and real kind of like chunks of your time positively contributing to some fantastic ideas that came forward. And we although we didn't bring that forward in the first meeting, we did make a lot of reference to them, and we thought it was absolutely only right and proper that we recapped on those schemes. So I asked Kevin Riley, because obviously I've only been in post for 9 weeks, I asked Kevin Riley to provide me with the best update that he can. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go through the list as I have them in front of me. But if you want to, if there's updates I haven't included in here, or schemes themselves that haven't been included, please do let me know at the end of this piece. So I know that the original group, the STTF, was kind of in response to the implementation over the emergency active travel lanes, and I know there's quite a lot of time elapsed since that inception, but it's actually quite short sort of on the ground implementation timeframes, really, because a lot of ideas take quite a long time to come into reality. And the other thing is that as an authority and as a council, we need to look collectively and borough wide. A lot of the schemes were in specific places, and we have to now work out how to sew them into bigger policy and funding decisions from central government. I have got an update in terms of local scheme. Of local visions and more local funding that doesn't come from central government, but if you don't mind, I will update you on that later. So the first one was a Christleton scheme led by John Beckett. I think John's on the call today, where the principal concerns raised were about the changing nature of the impacts of the traffic flow around the village central area. The group commissioned Planet Landscape Architects, so outside of any council funding, that was a personally driven scheme from that group, to develop a series of options focused around creating better landscape focus use of space in and around locations such as the village centre. I know that they were produced in relation to concerns about ambience and nature of the village, relationship with traffic, particularly school traffic. And the group were looking to use St Camp monies for implementation. Now, I've got an update on that as well. So concerns were raised on this particular scheme about linkages, particularly to the schools from the Broughton area, and the feeling that there was use of the A41 corridor for a number of trips that could have been kept on roads more suitable for moving those large volumes of traffic. There was concern about the tightness of the corridor for pedestrians and cyclists as a key link into Chester. So I know that John and colleagues were particularly keen on trying to promote the cycling and walking link and the route on the canal corridor. However, I know that in that context, Kevin did discuss with you the fact that the LC Whip had been produced as part of that borough-wide exercise, and that's really where the scheme needs to try to fit over the next few years. And the strengthening of the LC Whip, which is a process that we're going through at the moment, is going to be critical to quite a lot of the schemes that were put forward. And again, we'll come on to that in a bit more detail in the minute. The Christleton couldn't be part of the stage 2 of the Broughton Corridor, which is the active travel tranche 2, and as a result it was actually suggested that something like a mini Holland bid should be talked about. Now that actually went through to fruition. That went through into the EOI phase, which is an expression of interest. Now I've had a call with the DFT. I'll update you in more detail on how that call went, but we are still waiting for the results of that mini Holland bid to be discussed. In any LC Whip refresh and revisit, consideration needs to be given to these links to Christleton, and that's exactly really why we're commissioning a strengthening of that LC Whip plan. And I think that Christleton, as a separate entity and maybe outside of this group, further conversations need to be had about what's being termed village enhancements. So I just want to do a really short update on each of these, and we can come back and discuss them in the round, because there's some larger conversations to be had with regards to all of them. And I think we also have Mike Garrett on the call today. So we've got the Broughton Corridor. So this group looked at the corridor at quite a high level, identifying key issues along it, and looking at early ideas for initial interventions, such as a gyratory in the centre of the corridor. I know you analysed data from the modelling to provide a summary for this, and I know that the group's primarily focused on walking, cycling, making use of more of the shops and amenities, and some minor traffic flow improvements. I know that Kevin did quite a few sort of walkarounds with you, didn't he, for this? And again, with a little bit of overlap for the Christleton group, a quote from Planet to look at that central parade of shops that you were talking about. As a result, walkabouts were undertaken, and the inclusion of this corridor was taken forward by Cheshire West and Chester as part of that mini Holland bid, and that bid was for up to 100,000 for the development of that corridor. In terms of recommendations and actions, Kevin's sort of feedback on this is that the corridor should form one of 5 to 6 radial corridors in Chester, and could act as a pilot for part of an overall programme of active travel modes and placemaking focused improvements. Again, this hasn't been fitted, or it doesn't fit yet, into any policy or funding that has been made or will be made available from central government. So there's lots of, like I said, brilliant ideas, and there's lots of action that hinge on the results of things like the mini Holland bid. However, in the meantime, I think Kevin was quite interested in sort of looking at this and other ones as maybe sort of smaller replacements for what the EATL was trying to do from an active travel perspective. And Kevin's sort of report back was that it was a really good opportunity as an active travel demonstrator corridor, and could be considered as such going forward within a wider plan. And then I don't know whether Andy sent his apologies, but I think I did see him pop into the call earlier. So the next one is about city centre future thinking. And I know that you've all have read and seen Andy's smart mobility and placemaking report. I know that's been considered in the round within the Chester One City Plan. And I think the recommendations going forward, Andy, are as we are progressing them, which is continued conversation, looking at what that vision is, linking in with Robert Gatzenbury's work on the One City Plan refresh, thinking about that station gateway, thinking about quick wins that we can draw from the list of initiatives that you put forward in your plan. And thinking about some sort of quick early wins again in terms of that St Martin's Way, Nicholas Street, post Northgate. So I think this is a longer term conversation to be had. It's a longer term conversation to be had within policy and financial constructs that we've got at the moment, but certainly one that we're very, very pleased to have seen, and that's been produced, and it's there for us, Andy, to work with you on. The last and final one is Love Your Upton. So I'll just get to the correct part of this now. I think this group was slightly different to the others in that you were primarily focused around the residential area bounded by the key corridors of the A41 and the Liverpool Road. And I know that there was again sort of walkabouts undertaken, and what you discussed and what you brought forward, and I've looked at all of the slides in relation to this, is that you've got those kind of very similar residential rat run issues. You know, probably one of many that are sort of suffering from this at the moment across the Cheshire area. You were looking at the role of the corridor at the edges of them, and the direct impact on accessibility to and from the neighbourhood into town, and maybe that sort of longer linkage into a park and ride strategy. And I know that sort of Kevin's sort of recommendations and actions from this was there is a need to define the future role of what our EATL corridors looked like, but linking all of this work to the Park and Ride in Chester Zoo, University, Cheshire Oaks and the hospital. I don't think there's been much more done other than that sort of conversation and the presentation that's been brought to my attention. But again, having this kind of information in my back pocket to look at and consider in the wider range of things that we've got the ability to take forward. So although it is absolutely fantastic, is what I wanted to finish by saying. So although progress on the schemes themselves hasn't been made, that's because we've got to a point with this group now where we want to think differently about that, and we have to think differently about how we bring these things into fruition, how we make them happen, but how we get them to fit more widely into borough, LC Whip, government funding and policy frameworks that we're all having to work within. So I want you to know the work isn't wasted. The work is certainly not abortive. It's just got to be brought forward at different points in time, alongside all of the other things that we're trying to deliver at the moment. So I know that you've all worked really, really hard on those, including the LC Whip rewrite as well. I don't know whether, Christy, you've got anything to add to any of that summary.
No, nothing specific other than the LC Whip refresh as the brief has gone out. We've pointed the work to WSP, which is where Kevin Riley is from as well. He undertook the initial work with his team, so there's the continuity there, so we're confident we can hit the ground running. But it's about refreshing the LC Whip, seeing whether it's sense testing it in terms of the new guidelines, in terms of LTM 120. Are the routes still relevant? Will they work? What are the constraints, etc., things like that. So we've only just had the inception meeting, but we'll obviously update you as we go further along this path and keep you involved as much as we can on that.
Thanks, Rose, and thanks, Christy. And can I just add on behalf of the council our thanks to you all for all the time and effort that you've put in, and also to welcome you here again this evening for giving yet more time as we sort of discuss how we move forward, which we're going to talk about in item 4, and Rose has some ideas there, but we'll get on to that shortly. I just want to bring in Garfield first of all, and then there's a couple of other people with their hands up. Garfield. Okay,
thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rose, for that summary, which was, I think, encouraging, really, when you look into detail of what you were saying. I think is representing the projects that came forward from the STTF. I think we would have all liked quick wins. We would have all immediately loved you to say, oh, that's a brilliant scheme, we're going to put that in place straight away. But listening to Kevin and listening to the discussions regarding the wider picture, it soon became obvious that these are important developments that we came forward with, but they've got to be seen in a wider landscape. And I think that's now probably been accepted by everybody on our team or ex-team. But I think what I'd like to do is just to kind of point out the quality of the work that was done by the individual teams. I mean, you know, it was very extensive, it was very deep, and they procured external companies to give them advice and guidance where was needed. So I think we should really kind of acknowledge the work that they've done on that. And I think you did do there, but I just want to really kind of reinforce that, really, because it was good stuff. And also to show you the kind of the efforts that these type of teams can put into future projects. And, you know, if we can acknowledge that, that would be really useful. So I think that's it really. It's just seeing things in the wider context, which I think is something maybe that we can do now in this new forum that perhaps we didn't get so much of in STTF, is looking at the wider context, looking at the borough-wide schemes that need to take place and how these things can actually fit inside those. So so thanks again for the summary.
Thanks, Garfield, and I second that too. We we want to work with you, but we also have to work within what the art of the possible, as Rose would say, what is possible to do. So thank you, Garfield. Can I bring Stephen Perry in next, please?
Yeah, thanks everybody so far. And again, I'd like to endorse everything that has been said, particularly by Garfield, Rose and Karen. Just wearing my sort of chairman hat of the Love Your Upton group and the EATL group, there's only just one request I'd like to hang on to. I assume at some time a decision will have to be made on what to do with those travel lanes, and realizing they have been contentious and our efforts to try to make them less contentious maybe haven't worked out as we hope, but nonetheless, is it reasonable to say that on behalf of both those teams, before any final decision is made, can those teams in some way just be included in that discussion so that we have a sort of link back to their thoughts? And again, within that context, I'm not sure whether you can indicate, Rose, is there any actual or absolute time pressure to make a decision, or can it be left afloat for a while? Thanks all of you.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Shaw, would you like me to come back on that?
Yes, please, okay? Rose. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. And very good questions. And I know last time we'd had our meeting, I hadn't spoken to the DFT, and I now have. So we called quite a special meeting with them to actually discuss the position that we were in within the EATF position. And actually, we managed to get the 3 heads of the active travel unit alongside a gentleman called Jamal, who's our point of contact within the DFT. We raised this question directly with them, Stephen, because there's something called an experimental order, and that has a particular lifespan of time that is left on it. Now, that experimental order, it doesn't kind of mean that everything has to come up or change. It just means that if you want to reinstate something, you'd have to go through the process again. Now, what we're really concerned about is that with any of the ATF funding, there was very, very loud noises made by central government to say that if you change them, if you took them up, if you paused them, then you couldn't expect to see further funding from an ATF, from an active travel perspective, which is a position we don't want to be in. So what we've actually got them to agree is that we can do what needs to be done with our EATF tranche 1, so the cycle and bus lanes that you see going into the city, and they've given us access to a Sustrans advisor who is going to work with us to see what the art of the possible, to overuse that expression, what the art of the possible is with regards to those lanes, what could be the best use of them from an active travel perspective. It may preclude buses, it may preclude what we can do from a bus perspective, but what Sustrans want to do is work closely with us, and the DFT have actually said that they will provide it at the DFT's cost. Provide us with an advisor to actually work with us and this group to decide what can happen with those lanes now. So they've given us almost like a stay of execution. They have absolutely given us their assurance that we will see no bad press and no sort of poor PR internally in the DFT with regards to our ambition for active travel, and they will work with us to work at what the best way forward with them is. So there is an experimental order time limit, but for the minute that doesn't materially affect what they look like and what they're doing at the moment. Is that helpful, Stephen? Is that conclusive?
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think it's very positive. I think that not necessarily our anxiety, but I'm sure it's the authorities' anxiety that we might be hit with very negative reaction from the DFT. So well done for getting a more positive response. Again, sorry, not to push, but just for clarity, if you involve Sustrans or any other body, would it be appropriate to involve at least some of the members of that original team, or is it something you'd rather just hold in-house now?
Well, I think, Christy, you met with you might know him actually, Dragos. I don't know whether he's a known figure within the Sustrans world, but we've actually been, Christy and the DFT have been very, very quick in trying to uptake what that conversation means. But absolutely, I do believe, and please, Christy, correct me if I'm wrong, apart from that preliminary conversation to set the scene with our DFT, Sustrans appointed DFT advisor. I think after that, that's absolutely where we come to this group. That's absolutely where we talk to you to kind of hash out what these ideas might look like and what suggestions they're making and whether they fit with our local ambition. Christy, I don't know whether you want to.
I think you've summed it up quite well, to be honest, Rose. I think that's what we would do as a matter of course. Just to say, we've not heard officially back from Sustrans as yet. The meeting I had with them was on another scheme, but we need to bring that back. No, it's fine. That needs to come back at another meeting and possibly discussed under programme of future works or meetings, etc.
Yeah. What we were at great pains to say, Stephen, was the ambition of Cheshire West and Chester is not represented by what happened in tranche 1 of the EATF schemes, and they were really supportive of it. It was almost like a therapy session. You know, we went and said, you know, this is our ambition, this is what our leadership looks like in this space, we want to do more, and they were hugely appreciative of the pain that's been gone through and wanted to find that best possible solution with us.
Well, that's great news, and I think that's really helpful, because I think when those of us in the Bourton end of it talked about pause, we really intended to be a positive breathing space to move forward again, rather than to put an end to things. So what you just said is very reassuring. Thank you all. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Stephen. Can I bring in Ian Huffer now? Ian?
Sorry, I should have put my hand down because my question was essentially the same as Stephen's.
Okay.
I suppose supplementarily, I could ask, in all this, have you got in your own mind, or is anyone in the mind, the likely timescale of this process?
Well, sorry, Karen, may I come in again?
Of course, yeah.
Oh,
sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ian, pressing the DFT for timescales at the moment is quite difficult. So we also asked about the Mini Holland. We also asked about GP Prescribe, and we also asked about tranche 3. We asked about everything. While we had them there, believe me, we had an agenda item that was sort of bulleted and run by the minute. Now, this is something that they would like to move quickly with us on, and it's something that Christy and I followed up immediately with them. To actually kind of ascertain what the support looked like, how quickly could we have that conversation, you know, what would it look like in practice. So I don't have a date to give you. It won't be this side of the new year, I don't think. However, it's the one thing that we can apply pressure, because it's to do with officer time, and there's quite quick release for them to actually provide us this support to take the conversation forward. That there's delays on other things, but with this, Ian, we're very, very keen to move as quickly as we possibly can, and I will update this group as soon as we hear anything else back from them.
Thanks very much. Do you want to come back on that, Ian, before I move on to the next question, or is that okay?
So I'm happy with that. I do have a question about the terms of reference, but possibly I can raise that later.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Thank you. John Beckett.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, and thanks for the words of support to Rose. And I was amazed at how you were able to summarise all of that fairly quickly, so congratulations on that. What I would like to say is something about the Bourton Corridor first. The work done there was of a high technical quality by Mike Garrett and the team led by Stephen Perry. And it's difficult for Stephen to say this, but I would say it's an exceptional piece of work. And if Sustrans come in, the starting point has to be a discussion with key members of that group. So. But I would leave you with a thought. The reason why the trial failed was because the capacity of the road into Chester was too low, because there were right turns on and off that road. And the only difference with the proposal that's come forward is that there will be a reduction in the number of right turns off that road, which will involve quite significant.
You've muted yourself, John.
Did you hear me then?
Just after you said reduction of number of right turns, your sound went off, John.
I don't know. I didn't touch it. That's interesting. Okay. Thank you very much, Karen. So the first step, one of the first steps for Bourton Corridor is to do a series of trials, okay? Because the concept that's been developed is theoretical, needs to be proven in practice. So I'll just leave you with that thought, and you could be doing that now, okay? Christleton, There are 5 interventions that were designed. They were designed with CWAC, with Sean Trainer and his team. They were actually safety audited by CWAC, and we're only pushing for 1 or 2 of them. And the reason we're pushing for them isn't because it's some sort of improvement in the centre of Christleton, which is how you described it, Rose. It's basically a massive active travel opportunity because children are frightened about coming to school. The queuing on the A41 and A51 is causing massive cut through at exactly the same time that children arrive at school. The parents are actually saying to the children, we'll bring you into school by car. And
John, is there a question in there? Because what I don't want to spend all the time this evening doing is looking back. Is there a question in there? Okay.
I've nearly finished. There's basically just 1 or 2 schemes that we're putting forward. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Not a big scheme for the village, that's all. And I'm very impressed with the work that's being done on the city centre, and I've yet to go and have a look at the presentation in the forum, which is recommended by Stephen Perry. So those are my only inputs, really, Karen.
Okay, thanks for your views and comments, John. Is there anybody else who'd like to raise a question? Ian, you got your hand up again. Is that a new hand or previously?
Sorry. So I should have removed my hand.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Do we have any other points that people would like to raise regarding those updates? No? Okay. Going to move on to item 3 then, to review the terms of reference, and just to have a quick review of what we discussed at the last meeting. I think we kind of got to a good place, and there were some suggestions and recommendations made from the group around the changes that they'd like to see. Christie's very kindly gone away and taken those recommendations and worked up a revised version of those, which you should all have a copy of. And Christy, can I kindly ask you to just point out where you've made the changes, and then we can open up a bit of a discussion about them. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just quickly share my screen and then I can make notes as we go along as well. Hopefully you can still see that, yeah. And I'm not on mute. Okay, so there was comments made about not just pedestrians and cyclists but wheeling as well. So those have been weaved into the narrative there. When we look back at some of the
Christy, that's very small for me.
Oh, apologies. Yes. Yeah, I'm sure it is. Apologies. How's that? That much?
Yeah, better, okay. Thank you.
So sorry, I've got a very big screen in front of me, so apologies for that because it looked good for me. Yes, so we've built in wheeling in there as well, so obviously to build in any sort of accessibility inequality issues on that front. But when we look back at the comments that were made and we reviewed the terms of reference, a lot of the comments were already in there, maybe just not obvious. So we talked about equality as well, and we've talked about funding mechanisms and who should be on the group. So the major changes really have come about or have come about in terms of what the group purpose. Sorry, here on section 5 it is, sorry, section 6 is here in terms of what the potential themes are. So I think there was references made about that placemaking was important as well, obviously aligned with the climate change agenda, and obviously net zero, equality, health and well-being, social inclusion, equality and poverty. So they've been put into the work areas. Obviously comments were made about not just following government funding but to make the most of opportunities that were elsewhere. So we've put obviously a work stream there to investigate funding opportunities going forward, and then there was a reference here to about making best use of the parishes. So we've put in the text about utilising parishes as a conduit for messages as well, and also to be at the meetings as and when appropriate for particular schemes or particular topics and geographies and things like that. we've added a bit about voting, not that we think we will particularly have a cause to do that in the future, but just as a sort of caveat in terms of just future proofing it should we need to vote on a particular scheme or idea going forward. So that's there as a sort of a nod to the need if it comes about, but obviously the mechanisms behind it would have to be worked up in more detail. And I think that's the major changes. Unfortunately, I didn't keep the track changes before I sent it out, so I'll stop sharing there. And if anybody's got comments, I can put some notes on the bottom of this to send as we go, or to make changes as we go, should I say.
Thanks, Christy. So, I mean, by exception, what we've tried to do there is incorporate those comments that people did make. Is any, particularly around the sort of the localities issue, the voting issue, and I've forgotten what the other main one was. There were three main ones, weren't there?
We added wheeling as well to bring in the equality side of things as well.
Yes.
Equality is key within it. Obviously, there was a question raised. I should have mentioned, sorry, Councillor Shaw, there was a question raised about equality and the access officer. Obviously, I have put a reference there to the council's access officer being present. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make this meeting, but at future meetings they will be able to attend.
Okay, thank you, Christy. I'm going to bring in Ian at this point. Ian.
I should have introduced myself last time. I was on the last meeting and I would have made this point then, but it has partly been addressed by what has just been said. I'm a member of Greater Bolton Parish Council and a member of our Sustainable Traffic Working Party. And I accept, and as everyone accepts, it's unwieldy to have representation from all parish councils and town councils. But there is a question of how parishes' voices will be heard and their local knowledge and expertise utilised. Speaking for myself rather than on behalf of the council in which I'm a member, I have still concern that parish councils are essentially being relegated to an observer status. I know invitations to meetings, particularly in the context of where my interest and our interest would be to the bi-monthly meeting to the Chester area, but the input's going to be limited. There is one big issue. John Beckett has already alluded to this. There's been an awful lot of work carried out by the group of which John has played a leading part, and the task force of 5 South East Cheshire councils. And that particular proposal, the outcome of the Mini Holland bid, this is something that will remain a live proposal going forward, I suspect. And I just want to be satisfied in my mind that those of us who are really interested in the Bolton corridor, which is not just Greater Bolton Parish Council, but many other councils, that their voices are going to be properly heard in this process.
I can, Councillor Shaw, I could come back quickly. So Ian, I'll be working closely with you from Estate and Camp Section 106 funds and what we do with that money. So the South East Council, so Louise from Huntingdon, yourself, and all the other representatives, I'll be working very closely with you on a project-led basis with regards to the prioritisation for the spend of the Estate and Camp Section 106 monies, which I think is probably what you might find most benefit from and which would deliver most sort of results for you within that particular group.
Okay, does that address your question, Ian?
It does in part, but it's an evolving issue. I don't want to take them. I've heard what's said. Thank you.
I mean, just from the council's perspective, I don't think there's any sense that we want to exclude parish councils at all. Or quite the opposite. We want you to be as involved as you can be, but we also want to make good use of your time. And it might be that you as we evolve, that there are some meetings that are of more interest than others, and that we start to build subgroups. And I think we're going to discuss that in item 4. So it might be there that we sort of see something that's more focused and more fitting. Maybe we can pick up that discussion in that item again. Can I bring John Beckett in? And then I'm going to go to, I've got Crag. Is it Tony? Tony from Crag?
That's me, yes, thank you.
Hi. Okay, John.
Thanks, Karen. It's the same issue as Ian, actually. What we found in the South East Chester pilot was it was a sort of a mix of Cycling UK members and parish councils. So as proposals came up for discussion, it was quite interesting in that you got this sort of dynamic between what a cycling group would want for a community and how a community would look at a cycling proposal and how it would wish that to be presented to the community. The problem of not involving the parish councils as you go along is that you'll come up with some schemes and you'll present them. And if you're not careful, you'll find out if the parish councils are left behind, they'll oppose them, okay, which won't be helpful. So my suggestion would be that for the whole of Cheshire West, you identify perhaps half a dozen sort of representatives of parish councils and you involve those in the group as core members. That's my proposal. You don't have them as invited guests from time to time. You actually have a democratic input on the sort of total requirement of communities. What you've got there at the moment in that core group is a group of people who represent sort of specialist groups who have specialist interests, and there's a danger you'll end up with proposals that won't be supported. So that would be my proposal.
Thanks, John. I mean, one of the reasons why they looked at locality areas, geographical areas in the terms of reference was to try and address that. But I take the point you're making, so we'll take it away and consider it. And I think probably a good way to think about it might be actually as we get into the work programme and there are very specific pieces of work that need to be addressed, and that might be one way of working with the relevant parish councils there. But we will come back to it. Thank you. Can I bring Tony in now from the Chester Residents Association? Thanks,
yes,
Tony.
good evening. Well, first of all, I just want to say I think there have been some significant improvements to the terms of reference, and I'm really quite grateful for the fact I'm on this meeting looking at changes that I heard and have been affected. I've just got 2 points I wanted to make, and they are one of them is very similar to the 2 previous speakers, which is given that we represent, a large number of residents associations around the city, I've actually seen the power of those residents associations through Northgate, through the Northgate development, all the changes, the to and fro between residents that are affected and the people doing the work is actually been really helpful for both parties. And I'm looking at this not as being a block for the work that's going on, but to find a way of getting a conduit towards the feedback that you would probably need for those schemes to be supported. And some of that feedback, you're always going to get a polarization on views, whatever you do, but to have an ability to sense check what the population would feel about proposals that are almost separate from any individual interest group, I think would be quite useful. So, I kind of felt that I still think that we should be in the core group, but that's really something Rose, you and others must decide. But I'm looking at it more, not as an antagonistic put your boot in, but more a mechanism of providing feedback that you might find useful in the construction of your strategies and plans. So that's the first point. I think the second point, and perhaps this is my history in the sort of corporate world, I look at what you're doing, Rose, and I think it's incredibly ambitious, but so much of it is driven by a funding imperative that, and I don't mean to be, teaching grandma how to suck eggs here, but, if I were running this myself, I'd probably be saying to myself, well, is there any way you could split your work streams into things that need money and things that don't need money, and almost have a group that you can hold to task for delivery, because actually you don't need any funding. It can be done. So you could have a list of things and a group working solely with expertise around getting things done that don't need money, and a group that's very dedicated and knowledgeable and capable on how do you raise finance. And that way, at least you might come out of the year having delivered those things that you were able to deliver, and hopefully you'll deliver some of the things that require government or other people to provide you with the funding. It's just a thought, that's all.
Thanks, Tony, and it's an excellent question. And I see Rose smiling while you were talking, because I know she has something to share with us about that. Rose, I don't know if it's an appropriate time to as well give the update.
Cheers, Karen. Thanks. No, Tony, I'm smiling. It's brilliant to have you on the group. I love the way you think, and I think what you bring to us is absolutely fantastic. So thanks ever so much for your involvement and input. So after the last session, I think it was yourself and your colleague from CRAG, and there was others as well. You know, we kept talking about budget envelopes and framing by policy framework, you know, and what we could get from central government. And you really inspired me to go away and make it a priority to actually look externally, look differently, consider these different funding options and everything that you were sort of challenging us to consider. So I've actually commissioned a small piece of work to actually go to the 79 local transport authorities that exist within England and actually do a small piece of work to understand who they go to for money outside of central government, what funding streams there are available, how are they set up to actually get grants and different monies in, how do they actually create a groundswell of movement to create you know, different things happening within this space within integrated and sustainable transport, and then where do they look for those external non-governmental funding sources. So I've actually gone away and actually will be able to, hopefully, fingers crossed, by the time this group meets next, I'll be able to come back and talk to you about how we take that forward. Where do we look? How do we progress that groundswell of enthusiasm and activity? What does it need to look like? Where does the funding sit? What do we have to prove to get to it? There's a lot that rests on social deprivation, indices of deprivation, low levels of PTAR, which is public transport accessibility, that you can, if you can prove and demonstrate that we've got that to work on, and the ambition of a local area to really pull in the same direction, then I think that those funding sources are available and we can find them.
I mean, the one thing I would say is I keep being affected by my constant trips back and forth to London. And, you know, I did 28 miles on an e-bike last weekend, you know, going all over the city. Why? I mean, you know, it's a commercial enterprise.
Yeah.
And I don't have the details of what TfL paid or what they did, but my presumption, rightly or wrongly, is that it was actually a profit center for TfL rather than being a cost center. Yeah. And I look at the democratization of cycling now in London. I mean, just taking a view of the people on these bikes, my God, it spans almost every
generation, every
demographic. You know, facet that you could imagine. And I just think it could be something, regardless of any of the other infrastructure you do, that could be quite transformative in terms of people electing to use that rather than cars for short trips.
And it was only not profit making for 2 years, Tony. 2 years when it was this, not before the previous iteration, before the Santander cycle, before when it was Barclays who supported it. They only actually had to put money in it for 2 years before it washed its own face. And now Santander prop it up slightly, but it's a profit making enterprise. But what you've got to remember is they've got critical mass, and this is where you all come in. This is where every single person on this call, it plays their biggest part.
So I will say, Rose, I'm a huge fan of the non-Boris bikes because you can leave them anywhere. A bit like it's just like that scooter.
The Lime,
It's just like that scooter, and you can leave them anywhere. It's off an app. You sometimes have to walk 100 yards to find one. But my God, it's transformed my travel in London, and I think it would work here because I look at the scooters working. I think crumbs. It could be good too.
Yeah. So Tony, that's one.
Anyway,
I'm sure you want us to move on from it now. But Tony, we're actually now starting to that because of the ginger scooters and because of their prevalence and positive reaction to them, and also the usership. The next piece of work that Christy and a gentleman called Dave Saville is actually looking at is what's next.
Oh, super! That's great. That's a super answer. So I'm happy as Larry now.
Thanks for your input, Tony, and I think it's been said in the chat, superb input, and I would agree with that. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks ever so much. Cheers.
Okay, Ashley, we've got Ashley McCrae. Ashley, are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, something happened with the sound.
Nope, I can still hear, but I can't hear Ashley.
Did Ashley have trouble last time? No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Shaw. My suggestion relates to the climate emergency response plan, the highlights within it. All the people on this call are very knowledgeable, and they're all very clever as well. And they probably know. they certainly talk very well. They know what's trying to be achieved, but in terms of actually broadening the communication of this whole exercise, my suggestion relates to actually linking the 9 local actions which are in the transport section of the climate emergency response plan directly to the terms of reference, possibly including them as an appendix at the back, because they've been created with a great deal of work by a lot of people, and they effectively would act as the touchstone for everything that's being done by this group and for everything connected with transport for the future. If they're not, they will that become out by them being worked. So that's my suggestion. I mean, I'm thinking of the number 1 on the list was the residential design guide, which actually covers many of the points which have been mentioned already, including supporting electric vehicle, low carbon vehicle infrastructure. Now, that I think is probably been included. Many of these aspects have been included within the actual terms of reference, but I think it would do us all very well to actually have them explicit, perhaps as a reference point or an appendix within the terms of reference. That's my suggestion.
Can I make a suggestion? I mean, I think that's a really good idea. I'm just conscious that the response plan, it's a live document, isn't it? So maybe we could just have a reference in the terms of reference saying that it will always relate to the priorities as set out in the response plan, the climate emergency response plan for transport, as we would for, other emerging pieces of work, looking at things like the One City plan, and not to be, city centric, things like the Rural Mobility Fund and other priorities, so that they are joined up. Rose, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I just think it's absolutely excellent, Ashley, and thank you very much for contributing that. And I think Christy was thinking that actually that might form part of our draft work plan, and actually that is something that we need to have. We need to be bedded or held down these foundation stones of brilliant reports that are out there, and having that as a live link within the terms of reference means we'll constantly refer back to it. So no, thanks, Ashley. That's a really, really good takeaway for us.
Thanks for that, Rose. That's great. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we've got Mike. I'm going to take 3 more questions because I'm just conscious of time. We've got Mike, and then we'll take Eileen. Mike Garrett.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor. My first point is on section 2, second paragraph, the reference to sustainable travel modes. Could we have a reference there to freight, please? Because we do need sustainable freight strategies. So I know the word freight pops up a couple of pages on, but I think that should be in there as well. And the final point I'd like to make is that the STTF had the advantage, I would say, of inviting new ideas, novel ideas, and the ones that you talked about, Rose, earlier. And I'm very happy with what you said, but they were new ideas, and I'm slightly concerned that the terms of reference implies this is a, if you like, a reviewing organisation rather than one able to come up with new ideas. So I just want to, if we could consider the words in section 3 to make sure that that's still there. That was it. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Mike. And again, hear what you're saying, but I think perhaps we'll probably address that somewhat in the next item when we talk about the programme of future meetings, maybe. Interesting point about freight as well. Rose, I don't know if I mean, obviously it's a hugely important part of transport, but
it's massive and changing constantly. And I know, Mike, you've reached out and offered to support, and I was just desperately thinking in my head, God, did I get back to Mike's very kind email with that offer of support? If I haven't, I'm very sorry, but absolutely want to take
the offer is there. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. No, yeah, you'll find me a great advocate for everything, because it's one of the fastest changing landscapes, and yes, it's one of the things that gets ignored or left off, and it's hugely important. So Mike, I will be in touch on that email. I'm sorry I haven't been already.
Thanks both. Thanks, Rose. I've got Eileen, and then I've got Nicola, and then those are the last two questions. And Frank Tunney had his hand up. Frank, have you got a question you want to ask? Because I'm happy to take your question as the last one. Okay, right. So Eileen.
Hi, Rose. I just want to say I'm absolutely delighted that you included the terminology of wheelers, which I suggested. I'm really hoping that that's going to make a change for people who need mobility aids to become active, and will give them more choice. So I'm just really pleased to see that. Thank you.
We were grateful for your contribution, and absolutely, and it's every time that Christy and I talk about everything now, we are getting into that rhythm, having that narrative to make sure we're fully inclusive and include that. And in fact, I had a call on Proud Public Rights of Way earlier to this, and I was able to recount what you brought to the last meeting about the funding and trying to get open up everything for access for all, regardless of mobility. So you've really made an impression, and we're hoping to really make sure that comes through with everything that we produce from this group.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. And I second everything Rose has just said there. We got Nicola, and then I'll take Frank as the very last question. Nicola?
Hi, I'm Nicola from Marketing Cheshire. Sorry for arriving a bit late today's meeting. Nice to meet you, Rose. I'm really interested in this kind of overall group that's kind of going over the Chester, Ellesmere Port and Northwich, in Winsford Northwich that you've suggested in the section 4, because as part of one of our major projects is working on Destination Chester, which is Chester connected to Cheshire Oaks, the zoo, and even sort of to Delamere, and sort of pitching that whole area as kind of like a hook for bringing people into the Chester. So the connectivity from a sort of active travel aspect is really important as part of that. I do think it really could strengthen the destination proposition. So really glad to see, because I think in some ways, when in discussions we've had to date, we've been sort of focused on the city centre and the geography is close by to the city, but for us that's really important, but also that kind of connectivity, and there is the basis of an infrastructure. It's just how we make the most of it, with the suggestion, for example, that Tony had around bike hire and so on. So does that all, would you say places like the rural areas such as Delamere and some of the villages would be picked up in that kind of third grouping, or what's your thoughts on that?
Rose, sorry.
Yeah, Nicola, first of all, it's brilliant to have you on the call, and thanks very much for joining us. And I'd like to have a meeting with you actually about all of this stuff, because it's about we can make this into an attraction, can't we? We can actually talk about it in all of our destination marketing material about that sustainability and the active nature of our cities. The rural one's a really good question, and I'm going to actually look to Christy here to say, in terms of, obviously you need critical mass for some of the infrastructure stuff that we talked about, but obviously the rurality of Cheshire is there for everybody, and we need to be considering that in every conversation we have. Yeah. And I just wondered under which boundaries, Christy, you felt that the Delameres and others. Sorry, Nicola, talking over you.
No, it's okay. It's just I think that it is like the way we position it. There is a train link direct between Chester and Delamere, and you can hire bikes in Delamere. So if you can do that in a way that where you can take your bike from one to the other by train, and it's the basis is there. It's just kind of some small tweaks that really allow us to enhance that pitch. So
it's why we called this meeting the Integrated Sustainable Transport Team, Nicola, because actually that's exactly the conversation we need to be having. It's not just modal and it's not geographic, it's the whole picture. It's from train to bus to walk to cycle to wheeling to all of those things that connect everybody to make everything accessible.
And then I guess one of the slight question on that is the North Wales dimension within that as well, because I think that's something that we include in the pitch, and I think there there is that connectivity. You know, it can be part of our unique selling point for our place, you know, so that there is like active travel routes out to the coast.
And the Mersey Alliance that we're part of is looking specifically at those cross-border routes at the moment. And I also sit on the Growth Track 360 board, which is all about cross-border relationships and movement between ourselves and up into the Liverpool City region. The IRP, you know, the Integrated Rail Plan, looking at how we can get that electrification and emergence of better services rail-wise, using Chester as a gateway into North Wales. So as much as this group might not be able to cover all of that, what you've got are the hooks into having bigger conversations about that cross-border, about that tourism, and about making Cheshire a destination. Sorry, Christy, I asked you to come in and then completely talked, and I do apologise. Sorry.
I think you covered some of it as well, didn't you, in terms of the modes that would also bring in the different areas as well. But I think if there are specific geographies that aren't covered, I think we mentioned last. Maybe some of. I think the reason we've chose Ellesmere Port, Neston, Chester, Winsford North, which is because that's traditionally where our transport strategies were kind of rooted, as it were. But we obviously have a broader geography than just, you know, Northwich Town Centre, etc. But we just need to make sure that, and we say that in the terms of reference, that we don't leave anyone behind, but we need to maybe make that a little bit more clearer. One of the things we mentioned, I think, at the last meeting was about Frodsham and Helsby as well, and those kind of areas. So I think that probably just needs a bit of looking at and see how we can specifically mention particular geographies. We don't want to leave anybody behind. We don't want to mention every single rural area. But on the same hand, we need to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible. So I haven't answered the question, unfortunately, but I'm just trying to think about how we can weave that into the terms of reference. So that might be something we'll have to circulate around the groups, if that's okay, once we've looked at that.
Yeah. And I just, one other minor point, if you don't mind, sorry, Karen, is just around, you know, the potential for Chester to attract sort of events that are themed like, in relation to sort of active travel, which helps with the destination positioning. So, for example, grassroots cycling events and so on, you know, those are the kind of things that if we as a place are seen as a welcoming place for cyclists, you know, it's more likely that people within the place are going to cycle or inspired to cycle and so on. So I think I know that isn't broad, that isn't exactly a brief, but it's that connectivity with, you know, how we make this part of our place positioning and how it's part of our identity and so on. So maybe, Rose, we will just be best off having a separate chat about some of those ideas and linkages.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff to talk about. Yeah.
It's actually got me feeling really excited about the possibilities. So thanks for your input, and I'm sure we will pick up with you outside of this meeting. That's a really important thing. I'm just going to bring in Frank for the final question. Frank, if you will.
Okay, I hope you can hear me this time. The last time when it failed, it was because I'm using a Mac and it didn't like the microphone for some reason. So, okay. Right, we have, I mentioned Chalk earlier on in the chat, and Chalk is the representative body for all of the local councils in the whole of Cheshire, Cheshire East and Cheshire West. And they have a voice that can be heard amongst every parish council that's a member. And there are 97 of them in Cheshire West. So it's a lot, and you can use them as a conduit to get to these parishes. Very important. Secondly, I am concerned that we are losing sight of, and I know I bang on about it, and I apologise, I do apologise, losing track of rurality. There are a large number of people in the southeast of the county, of the borough rather than the county, who feel ignored because we've got a bus, we are some distance away from any station, and it's a problem for us because it means that everyone uses cars. There was someone talking, I think it was Rose, you talked earlier about e-scooters and bikes. Won't work in Tarporley and the surrounding areas. You can't use them on those country roads because they're so dangerous. You know, the roads themselves, it isn't the bikes, it's the roads that are dangerous. So I think maybe there ought to be a way within this forum to actually look at what it is that rural communities really need from this strategy. You talk about it and integrated. We don't feel integrated at all. In fact, we feel disaggregated. And the final thing for you, if you need some help on logistics, I'm a former fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, and I've spent 35 years in the third-party logistics sector. So if you need some help, just ask.
Thanks, Frank. Rose, can I just come in there because Frank, I mean, first of all, I've actually made contact with Evelyn Moore Dutton to try and for us to get together to discuss your proposal around the community bus service in Tarporley. But I think, and we're going to come on to this in the next item actually, but I actually think that with the bus strategy and with the bus services improvement plan, and yes, it's hinged on funding, but there will be huge opportunity to improve rural transport, and actually that's one of its key focuses. And I know Garfield just made a comment in the chat. I didn't pick it all up, but I'm sure he was saying that was a priority also for him. Rose, is there anything you want to just add there?
No, I mean, Garfield, I think, said it's brilliantly, that it will always be his agenda, and therefore for this group, it will never be let off our agenda, Frank. And when we talk about those 3 divisions, it doesn't mean the cities, it means everything around them. And actually, there's some brilliant pieces we can get involved with in this group, which is one is the Rural Mobility Fund, what it looks like now, what it could look like in the future, demand responsive transport in terms of that public transport linkages for rural communities, but also the local transport plan rewrite. That's coming up fast, and we're being given new guidance. It could be index linked, and it will all be about connecting communities, and that does not, easy for me to say by this time of night, it's a wonder I've got any words of sense coming out. But so yeah, Garfield, want to?
Yeah, I mean, if you could give me 25 minutes, I will give you an update on why I think rural is so important. But it is, I mean, coming from, I've worked with Gerard Rhodes on the Rural Mobility Fund, and those of you in the previous task group 4 of the STCF will know of my keenness on that. But also, I'm a runner in the area, I'm a cyclist in the area, I'm a transport community rail head, you know, of the area. To me, it's just key. It's absolutely key. And why the Delamere and Frodsham area is not an area of outstanding natural beauty, I don't know, but that's something we should try for. So that's 25 minutes condensed into half. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for all your contributions, and thanks, Frank, and we'll look forward to catching up with you with Evelyn very soon. I am going to move on to item 4 now because I'm conscious of time and we've only got 20 minutes remaining. I think this item 4 is quite important. So, programme of future meetings. Rose, we've discussed some ideas, and I just wonder whether you wanted to outline those and talk specifically about the things we know that are upcoming.
Yeah, okay, so thanks, Karen. So what we don't want this group to feel is that you did all of that great work as part of your other groups. We've come together and then it's just going to be us talking to you about things that we've done, and it's not what we want it to be, and it's not what it's going to be. But you have to forgive us that in our inaugural meeting, that we just want to kind of get our boundaries set. We want the terms of reference there. We want to have that core group agreed. We want everyone to understand sort of what we need to look like going forwards. So bear with us sort of as we start to norm and form, as the expression goes. But what we then would like to start talking to you about are things like, for example, the LC WIP, so the local cycling walking implementation plan that Christie's alluded to. We want that to be strengthened. We definitely think that there's room for improvement and comment from this group. So that's definitely on the agenda of a forward work plan. GP prescribing, we're waiting again for our results on that. I'm pretty hopeful, but I don't want that to sort of sway anyone or make you feel overly ambitious, because at the moment there's the bung in the DFT where everything's sort of held up. So, but GP prescribing is definitely sort of up there, and we'll need the support of different groups here. Stephen, you've talked about Ellesmere Port cycling strategies that you can lift and help from what you've done in Cheshire and Chester. Sorry, actually the GP prescribing actually might have Ellesmere Port as its base. what can we learn from across the county about what we can apply from an active travel perspective there. So there's that. Tranche 3 of the active travel funding from a central government perspective is in the round somewhere in this conversation. Mini Holland, again, waiting to hear what the outcome of that. Obviously, that is something that we would then want to come back to this group with to discuss what our next steps were. We've got the local transport plan rewrite is a really big one because they're delivering different guidance for how this is written. We think it's going to be index linked, so we actually think funding is going to be associated with what we say we'll deliver within that LTP. And so obviously there's a huge role for this group to play in saying what that needs to look like, what ambition do we want to have, what do we want to commit to, what do we want to deliver against. And there's a huge part of it that might be things that are slightly sensitive or difficult that will need to have that, you know, support behind, community support behind, because some of it's going to be, you know, probably pretty out there. Some of it's going to be really quite strong. It might be road reallocation. There could be things in there that we know that sometimes we get that community sort of rebuttal on. So actually, as a group of advocates within the space to push that agenda forward, there's going to be certain things in there that it will be really good to get your support, input and backing from. There's a really important one coming up, which is Park and Ride. Now we're going to go out to recontract the Park and Ride. Andy, within your smart mobility plan, and others have suggested this to me, is what about making the Park and Ride sites mobility hubs? Should it just be about bringing cars, or should we actually have bikes coming to there? What about EV charging? What do we want to see in that contract? And it's an amazing sort of metro system that we've got from the compass points, and it's just not as widely used as it could be. And there's loads of reasons behind that. I'm really passionate about this one. I think that it could work brilliantly. And I would really welcome your help when we come to that contracting position to talk to you about what you think needs to be included and what we do to strengthen it. Christy would want to talk very, very clearly with you about our Bus Back Better, the enhanced partnership, this sort of BSIP, bus service improvement plan. And so as a result, you know, there's a really big piece of work to do around that enhanced partnership for bus. I haven't touched Mike or Frank on any of our freight related work that's needed at the moment. It's sort of, it's there and I know it needs looking at, but I haven't got something concrete to bring to the table, but my goodness, there will be things coming up. So what I wanted you to see is that there's a whole sort of, you know, not backlog, but there's a whole series of things that we want to bring to this group. So do feel that you will be able to contribute. Do feel that your involvement and time that you're giving will turn into something positive for the communities that you live and work within. Just at the moment, there isn't something to put on the table today or subgroups to go into, because we just wanted to get our terms of reference and things right. So Karen, I hope I've understood correctly in terms of what you wanted me to update on at that point. But that's sort of what we're looking forward as a forward plan of work. And actually, so the only other thing to add there is that we've now got, through this sort of petitioning we've been doing with the DFT on the ATFs and the result we got from that, they've agreed to set up regular recurring meetings with us, with not only active travel but their head of Bus Back Better as well, their head of bus basically, so that we can have a collective conversation with the right people at the DFT in perpetuity. So if there are things that this group want to get clearer answers on or quicker answers, we're going to have that systematic link into the DFT to ask them. And then of course, that's notwithstanding, Tony, you know, the conversation we were having earlier on about localised funding and a local vision, and that piece of work I've already commissioned to try to understand what others do so that we can get a better vision of what that looks like. So Karen, was that sort of in the remit of where you wanted me to, what you wanted?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a discussion really about it. I mean, I didn't think that we were going to nail down our civic programme of meetings for the next year, but you know, but I thought let's open up the discussion and get people's thoughts. So I've got Stephen Perry with his hand up. Thanks, Rose.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Rose, I know we've talked about this before, and I'm not quite sure how it fits into this particular subject, but it could have covered on the terms of reference as well. I just feel we need to link our thoughts perhaps more clearly and our plans more clearly with planning. you alluded to Ellesmere Port, and certainly as the cycling community are very willing to help in whatever we can to build some sort of cycling infrastructure proposal, which is something that ideally could then be placed as a framework into any which future development plans in Ellesmere Port would fit. But I also have in mind the sort of the area between the railway station and Westminster Road, Charterhall Drive as it's sometimes called, and there's plans being proposed, I think, to further develop that area. And again, that's a classic example where I just feel that we have to impose, and I think I use the word impose intentionally, restrictions on what happens there to try to not only maintain but to develop walking and cycling infrastructure across that land. So what am I saying? I don't know. I'm maybe saying whether we should have a planning representative on this meeting. I don't know what I'm saying really, but just please, can we think about that very important link when we talk about those sorts of examples with planning, because I think it's a two-way street. We can help them and they can help us. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And just to add, Rose, that I know that planning are working on, just as they did with the supplementary planning document for parking, they are, I think, now working on this for walking and cycling as well. It's certainly being reviewed. So that is definitely an area where we should be dovetailing the work that we're doing and making sure that it all aligns with our wider council priorities and not least the climate emergency. So thanks for that. Garfield, I'll bring you in there.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think if we look at Section 8 and the potential themes, you can see that we can expect at any point in the future, if you like, some remit to come forward from Rose and her team to do work on one of these areas. We can't have all these people just sitting on the committee just waiting for something to come along that they might well be able to contribute to. So I think Karen's suggestion that there will be subgroups aligned to a particular project when those projects come forward. But I've had Rose's assurance that we will indeed be working as groups to move forward various agendas that the council have, and not just simply be listening to the latest kind of developments, important as they are. I think that's important to note. But I also think that perhaps looking at the representation of the group, if we are going to be across such a wide remit, I mean, we're covering areas now that we didn't do in STTF, we need a representation which is perhaps more evenly spread across those and that wider population of groups without too much emphasis on one particular area. So I think at some point we will need to perhaps just balance out the membership to make sure we do address those areas under Section 8. Thank you.
Thanks, Garfield. Okay. Any other points that people wish to raise at this stage on the programme of meetings? I mean, I presume that we're going to have a January meeting, Rose, and then from there we can determine more clearly our sort of projected sort of work plan and how it's going to sort of unfold.
That's right, Karen. Yeah, and do bear with us as we sort of grow into this and work out that sort of room of requirements from Harry Potter. You know, what does this need to be, and how can we make it get there? So do bear with us as we sort of test the water a bit and work out what works. But definitely January meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Rose. So if we don't have any further questions, then is there any other business? Got Kathy with her hand up. Kathy Harrington. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, folks. Just a quick question. Oh, hang on, I'll reveal myself here. Just a quick question about feedback to the public. And I'm sure you're thinking about this, but it's just really a reminder to say that I think we need to make sure think about how we're going to feedback to the public and make known what's going on in both this task force and also in the subgroups. So it's just a nudge, really.
Okay. All right. Rose, do you want to comment, or should we just want to take that away?
Thank you. Thanks very much. And we will take that away.
Okay. Christy, did you want to come in there at this point?
Apologies. In terms of the feedback to the public, obviously we'll take those thoughts on board. We had issues with the Sustainable Transport Task Force on our website, which we're still trying to address, but we'll make sure that we do some press release once we've got the group better established and make sure that people can observe the meeting and find out about it. But I did want to mention one piece of work that was referenced earlier by Rose in terms of the bus service improvement plan. We've got a big task ahead of us to meet the government's deadline of an enhanced partnership in play by the 31st of March. And we're working with the operators in the borough, and we've got to come to some sort of a consensus agreement. We published our bus service improvement plan to time and schedule on the 31st of October as per the government requests. We've put in an ask for £37 million. We were told to be ambitious, but we're not sure, whether the settlement we get back will be reflective of our ask. So we just have to sort of temper that in the meantime. But what we do need to do is set up a programme of meetings. One of them is just with ourselves, officers and the operators, just to discuss, the mechanisms around how we're working in the enhanced partnership. But we'll need an enhanced partnership forum, which will need to be made up from council officers, relevant transport operators, obviously representatives from businesses, maybe the bids chamber, etc. But we need some potential representation to chair the meeting. And we don't have a specific public transport group that I'm aware of in Cheshire West, or a bus group. So it's really just a plea really to see if anybody would be interested in being on the group and chairing it. And obviously we'd have to do some sort of, I wouldn't say interview process, but speak to the operators about the best person, to chair it so that they're happy with it, as well as the council being happy. So anyone with a bus background who may have worked in the bus industry or knowledge of, etc., we'd be interested to understand if there's an interest out there to be the chair. As I say, it'll be subject to some form of scrutiny by the operators, etc. But obviously, if you're interested, please do get in touch with me or on the transport strategy inbox, and we can take it from there. Really, even if it's on an interim basis, and we get another person involved later. So I hope that's what you wanted me to ask, Councillor Shaw, because I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there. So apologies.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Christy, that's a really important and influential role as well, and will, play a important role in our bus services improvement plan. So yeah, it's very good of you to raise that at this juncture. So if anyone's interested, do get in touch. John, you've got your hand up, John Beckett.
Yeah, just a quick thought. It's Kathy sort of triggered it with her comment about feeding back to the communities. If you can actually get your mind around including in the core group representative parish councils from the different areas around the whole of Cheshire West. It doesn't have to be every parish council, it could be half a dozen people. You have a mechanism there for actually taking inputs from the parishes, from the communities into the task force, and you also have a mechanism for feeding messages back. I'll just leave you with that thought about communication, and that's all it was.
Okay, I think there's also, as suggested by Frank, a very important role for Chalk. Rose, just to say, you may not have come across Chalk yet, but Jackie Weaver might be a good person to meet with if you haven't done already.
Okay, now I understand. Right, okay.
I mean, she's very supportive, and she does work very hard to try and make sure that the councils are supported and that the links between the different tiers of councils are there. So
can I just put in, Councillor Shaw, tomorrow morning we have a Chalk executive meeting which I should be attending. I should be more than happy to just tell her or tell the executive that this is going on, if you're happy for me to do so.
Yeah, great.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thanks, Frank. Okay, so do we have any other questions then at this point? Okay, well, can I just say thank you so much to all of you for joining this evening and for giving up your time on this winter evening. And it's been really, really useful and helpful and informative discussion, and the prospects for the future are quite exciting, I feel, and We've got a lot to look forward to, and we've got to sort of move forward with hope that we are going to bring improvements for the borough, and for our residents and businesses and communities, most importantly. So just from me, a thank you. I want to thank the officers as well, and of course I also want to thank Garfield for his continued support, and for his vice chairmanship, which was very important at the beginning when I had some technical issues. So thank you. And I wish you all a good night. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, Councillor.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye, everybody. So, I think, are you muted, Christy?
Of course I am. Apologies. I'm just gonna got a couple of people on that I need to stop recording, so I have to be the last person on the
yeah, that's right,
on the recording. Apologies. So Roger and Peter might be ejecting you. I think I've got Roger and Peter still on the meeting, so it's no offense, but I need to end the meeting so I can close down the recording. So apologies, Roger and Peter. There we go. Yeah, okay, I'll stop that now. If I can remember how.